You guys ever get a little sad? A little down? I know I do whenever I see myself in the mirror, or realise that my age is becoming way too serious for my liking. Warhammer as a whole is full of tragedy and sadness, especially 40k, it is the grim dark far future after all. There's plenty of muck and grime in Warhammer Fantasy battles too. It's not nearly as depressing as Warhammer 40,000, but the old world has plenty of tales that will draw a tear to your eye. So, let's put down our thinking caps and grab a box of tissues. No, not for that reason, you sick bastard, keep your Marathi fan art elsewhere. Today we're discussing some of the most tragic moments in Warhammer Fantasy. First on our list is the fall of Olria Magdova, a key character in the Gotrek and Felix books. Olria had a pretty nice start to life. Born to Ivan Stragov, nobleman of Kislev, she is described as a beautiful woman. From an early age she mastered the arts of horse riding, swordsmanship and archery, often helping her father and impressing his men with her skills with a blade. At age 20, Ulrika met Felix Jaeger and the two began an affair. Had she known what that innocent moment would lead to, she likely would have rejected Felix in the same way a woman might reject a plague bearer of Nurgle. At the time, of course, she was none the wiser, and through meeting Felix as well as his dwarven companion Gotrek, she got to assist on some great adventures, including taking down a dragon, but all that came to an end when the gang faced off against the vampire Adolphus Krieger. By this point, Ulrika had largely moved on from Felix. The pair argued too much, and she had instead found what felt closer to love with Maximilian Schreiber, a wizard she saved in an earlier adventure. Ulrika and Max were torn apart from each other when Krieger entered the picture, though, as he used her as a hostage to escape Gotrek, capturing Ulrika and believing she could make for a beautiful companion. Against her will, despite her efforts to kill Krieger, Ulrika was turned into a vampire. She was forced to drink blood to shy away from the light of the sun, and her once beautiful hair turned white as she became one of the undead. Her father sought to free her from Krieger's control as he assaulted Krieger's castle with Gotrek and Felix, but wasn't strong enough. A powerful artifact gave Krieger control over vampires, and Ulrika had to watch as her father was killed by giant bats. Only upon seeing his fate could she resist the control and help take down Krieger. From there, Ulrika joined the Lamian Sisterhood. Although she never truly accepted life as a vampire, she only fed on those she deemed unfit to live. Bandits, robbers, worse. She fought against other undead like Hermione von Auerbach, but never again did she find true happiness. Later in life she returned to her home country of Kislev, to the city of Prague, only to find out that Max had shacked up with a beautiful ice witch. Ulrika's life is perhaps not the saddest tale, as she does keep on living as a vampire, but as she lives in a body forced upon her by someone else, it's difficult to say she enjoys any part of her life. Her father too experiences great tragedy in seeing what his daughter has become, only to prove too weak to save her. It's admirable that Ulrika keeps most of herself and her beliefs, but it doesn't make what happens to her any less sad. At least there's a small tidbit of lore that in AOS, the ghost of Snorri Nosebiter says he saw her and Max at a party in the realm of Shaiish, but that's not fully confirmed. Next, we're going to be talking the betrayal of Lunara. Even in the crowded, edgy space that is Dark Elf society, Malus Darkblade takes the edgelord cake. He feels like a self-insert written by the nerdiest nerd who wanted to be the coolest guy around.
Yeah, he's really handsome and cool, and he has a demon in his blade that gives him superpowers.
Alright, Jeff, calm down. Of course, Malus Darkblade is actually not as cool as he sounds on paper, and he didn't manage to get a demon in his sword all by himself. He needed a fair bit of help to make it to the Chaos Wastes, and not end up on the end of a marauder's axe. Lunara was a corsair, part of the crew of a ship Malus Darkblade had been put on by his father to complete a rite of passage. However, Malus's daddy didn't actually want him to succeed in this effort, and the plan was for Malus to go down with the ship. Lunara and the others actually ended up quite liking Malus, with Lunara growing especially loyal to him. And so, when the time came for him to try and ascend to greater powers, of course, Lunara and the crew were on board. However, as they fought their way through the Chaos Wastes, even after being betrayed by Beastmen, Lunara realised that just like the US in the 1980s, trickle-down doesn't work for everyone. You can't really ascend to greater powers just by having a friend who did. After risking her life countless times to get Malus to meet Zarkan, the demon and her former friend betrayed Lunara in the Chaos Wastes. She realised she had done it all for nothing. She had given her life to Malus, she had gone so far believing that he was as loyal to her as she was to him, and yet still she was there bleeding out in the cold because of some test his new demon lord had given him. Lunara did get a bit of redemption as she was revived by Slaanesh and given powers strong enough to challenge Malus, but it still feels like a great tragedy that she ended up the way she did, all because she believed in who she thought was an ally too much. It hits especially hard in the Malus Darkblade novels, which are a good read if you're looking to delve deeper into Warhammer Fantasy. There is a lot of death in Warhammer, a lot of tragic death too. I could have picked out any number of sad stories brought about by the loss of a great hero, but to keep the video from focusing too much on the lands of men and elves, I thought instead I'd give a spotlight to a squig. Weird, I know, but Gobbler's death is on the list. Orcs and goblins might cause tragedy in the lands of our heroes every day, and while I don't think they experience the feeling of loss that much, if there was ever a goblin smarter than the rest, it was Scarsnik. Both in his own books and in his spotlight in the end times, Scarsnik is a character you can't help but like. He gives you the same feeling you have when you work your first job, largely you're just surrounded by idiots. While Gobbler likely can be thrown into the idiot category as well, he's a true ally and friend of Scarsnik. They started this journey together, and that massive squig is the only creature that Scarsnik can really confide in. The rest of Scarsnik's forces are too stupid to understand him or would stab him in the back at the first sign of weakness. Despite being surrounded by thousands of goblins at any one point, Scarsnik's experience in the Warhammer world seems quite lonely. During the final siege of Carrick 8 Peaks, after the remnants of the dwarves had been dealt with by the Skaven, Scarsnik made one last play to try and take the peaks, leading the Skaven into a perfect ambush. As quick headtakers scrambled to deal with the goblins sprinting down from nearby hills, Scarsnik and Gobbler wrecked through the rat lines. All appeared to be going well, but it's worth remembering this took place in the end times, and Scarsnik couldn't win because no one was allowed to win in the end times except Skaven and Chaos, and they won just because. And so Scarsnik's goblins found out there were suddenly thousands of rats they'd not accounted for. Fighting desperately, Scarsnik kept himself alive against the newly emboldened foe. Gobbler did as his name suggests and ate a Packmaster lunging for Scarsnik, but as the Packmaster refused to die, he burst out of Gobbler's stomach, killing the squig and ending Scarsnik's care for the peaks. After that battle, Scarsnik leaves not only the peaks, but the setting as a whole. He's lost everything through losing Gobbler, as with the squig by his side, there was always the chance he could start again. Gobbler might not be the most fleshed out character on this list, nor is he really the most tragic death in all of Warhammer Fantasy, but his loss is a huge one to Scarsnik. It's basically like losing your first pet, except in a manner so horrific you are written out of existence. It's easy to remember Sigmar as being a great dude. It's quite hard to imagine bad things happening to him, because he basically had every man's dream life, ascending to godhood, so he could return to kick some demon arse in times of great peril. However, Sigmar's rise to the throne was full of tragedy, and he has one of the saddest stories in Warhammer Fantasy if you think about all the pain he went through to become the first emperor. Losing his mother on the night of his birth, Sigmar grew attached to his father, King Bjorn of the Ungbarons, as a child and young warrior. Bjorn was a strong warrior in his own right, and the two defeated many enemies of man together. Sigmar also joined up with Wolfguards and Pendrag, two young fighters that would become his sword brothers. Sigmar had another sword brother, a man named Trinovantes, who sacrificed himself to win a battle against a rampaging band of orcs. Trinovantes' brother Geryon and his sister Ravenna knew Sigmar well. Geryon was a dear friend of his, but at the loss of his brother, he turned his back on Sigmar and swore to kill him. Geryon even went so far as to kill his sister Ravenna, who had become Sigmar's lover. Sigmar in part sees himself as responsible for Ravenna's death, as he had promised her he would give up fighting once he had united the Empire, and in failing to do that quickly, her demise had come about. Geryon also cut Sigmar with a poison blade, sending him to the Grey Vaults, which is basically like Warhammer Limbo. There, demons are trying to fight for Sigmar's soul when Bjorn appears. This is no apparition. Sigmar's father allowed himself to fall in battle so he could meet his son and defy the demons. Bjorn held off the demons long enough for Sigmar to escape, but he was lost. Geryon returns to Sigmar's story as a demon prince of Slaanesh, Azazel. Alongside Sigmar's nemesis Cormac Bloodaxe, they slay Pendrag, Sigmar's sword brother who just returned to youth after being cursed by a necromancer, and Azazel flees back into the wastes, ready to curse Sigmar and his realm again. You could even argue Sigmar's end is tragic, as he leaves the Empire united but not wholly safe. It'll still fall under attack from many threats, and Sigmar will instead have to watch over it from afar, only able to help at the most crucial of times. If I have to pick a moment for Sigmar's entry in this list as the most tragic, I would say it is his father's death, though. Ravenna and Pendrag lost by Geryon sucks, but Bjorn's death feels just that tad bit more tragic because Bjorn knew what he had to do long before he had to do it. While writing the script of this video, I knew I had to include a tragic moment that wasn't just for one character, but the setting as a whole. The decline of the lizardmen, elves and dwarves are all tragic in their own way, showing a world that once had so much life and hope is eventually doomed because the old powers have crumbled under the constant pressure chaos puts on them. However, I don't think any event was more tragic for the setting than the end times. I could have based this entire list on end times moments. The lizardmen forced to flee, Teclis and his decline, the fall of Altdorf, the deaths of Isabella and Vlad. It felt like Warhammer Fantasy did didn't do a lot for a long time, and then did everything at once with this story event. The real tragedy here isn't the characters though, it's what happened to the world and IP. I won't go too heavily into that though, we've done it countless times before. However, I will say that it still remains Warhammer Fantasy's biggest tragedy both in and out of universe. Our heroes do all they can to stop the end of the world, and yet they just cannot save it. This leads to more and more desperate measures being taken, more sacrifices being made that they would never thought they would have to make. Ulth 1 sinks, the Empire becomes a ruin, the Dwarf holds a new home for the Skaven, and yet even at the final battle, they can't do anything but ensure that a few key names get to make it to the Age of Sigmar setting. Because of the poor writing, it's quite difficult to get that sense of tragedy from reading the End Times books, but when you think about all that transpires, it really is the saddest story Warhammer Fantasy has told, even if it uses the cheapness of just killing everyone you liked. What are some other Warhammer Fantasy moments you think are tragic? I know I've missed loads, and so please give them a comment below. I'll be reading as always. But with all that being said, until next time, ghouls and gals, I'll see ya!